Hello everyone, I'm Liam Newman. Today I'm talking with Oleg and Liam, Jenkins contributor and core maintainer, about the JEP-200 update. Oleg, tell us about that.
Okay, thanks for the introduction, Liam. I'll talk about a bit JEP-200 specifics, how it impacts Jenkins admins, and then I will follow up about development and testing things in the blog post.
Cool.
So let's proceed a bit. Probably everybody has seen this blog post. It has been published on February 15th. It was about Jenkins becoming a Bitcoin miner. Actually, it caused some buzz in the community, and it got reposted a lot. But actually, it's a pretty old issue. It has been fixed in April 2017 and has been announced at the same time. And it's available in Jenkins for more than 1 year. Actually, this issue is a class deserialization attack. So it's a well-known vulnerability for Java applications, and Jenkins is only one of such applications affected. But yeah, we had an issue with that. Okay, let's talk why did it happen. As I said, there are class deserialization attacks which are possible against applications. And in the case of Jenkins, we had one vulnerability in remoting CLI. So there is a command line interface which allows to connect to Jenkins to execute some commands or to get at least help information. And actually, it was a problem because everybody was able to connect to this CLI endpoint and to send classes over that. So there was an opportunity to launch a code execution attack without authentication. It's what we fixed in April 2017. Actually, we applied several mitigations. So firstly, we blacklisted vulnerable classes. Then we disabled remoting CLI altogether in new releases, and we provided a replacement for the implementation. So now there are two other types of remoting CLI. And even for previous versions, before 2.46.2, it was possible to disable remoting CLI, and it's what we recommended Jenkins admin to do. Actually, we were getting some notifications about exploits happening in public. So we issued several notifications and advisories about the fact. But the problem is that even after almost 1 year, we still have some reports about that because some instances didn't update timely. So they use old core versions, they're public, face internet, so everybody can use CLI to connect and execute something on that. So some instances are just vulnerable by default because they don't upgrade.
Right.
If you use Jenkins, we usually recommend to use LTS version to follow security advisories. If you go to the link on this slide, you can subscribe to these advisories and get information and also notifications before the release actually happens.
Cool.
Okay. But yeah, let's talk about technical side. As I said, we blacklisted classes. Unfortunately, blacklisting is a limited option because you can blacklist one class, then another class, but since there are thousands of different classes coming from libraries in Jenkins, you never know what might break, what might have exploits, and it's generally just a whack-a-mole game. So you never know whether you are secure or not. Of course, when we get a notification, we can fix another security issue, issue another advisory. But generally, it's a big problem because at any point, there may be a public disclosure or whatever. And in security communities, the agreement about this class of attacks is that blacklisting is not enough, and there is another solution needed. So JEP-200 is this solution. And the approach is that if you want to work all moles, you just need a big hammer. So JEP-200 is such hammer we deliver in new versions. And I'm going to talk about about the details. Okay, so just let me cite Jesse Glick. He said that JEP-200 is just the biggest incompatible change to Jenkins in recent memory.
Quote unquote, just a little.
Yeah, I also want to use bold text, then use red color, and add several images to highlight that.
Right.
Because actually it's a really big change, and it's a really big time investment from Jenkins community to deliver that. And it's one of the first changes in this class, because firstly we have JEP-200, it's a new process, and then the entire Jenkins enhancement process is new for us. And we are ready to do breaking changes now, and we are setting up policies, processes. So in many terms, the JEP-200 is the first attempt to do that, and we try to do it gracefully. Okay, regarding the background, actually we started planning this change 1 year ago, when it became obvious that the state is not sustainable. And the first draft of JEP-200 was published in October. There is a link, so if you're interested, you can go there. But generally the idea is that we switch from blacklisting to whitelisting, and it means that if you do not explicitly allow a class to be serialized, it will be rejected. So it means that, with some exemptions, all classes from third-party libraries will be rejected unless you allow them. So it significantly reduces the scope of potential attacks, and we did reviews for other things.
So it specifically means that you only allow remoting from classes that you've reviewed.
Not only remoting, but also extreme.
Okay. Yes.
So remoting is a communication between agents and master, and extreme is an engine which we use to serialize objects on the disk. As you probably know, Jenkins uses file system-based storage.
Right.
So it serializes data to the disk, and then it loads this data from the disk.
Got it.
Moreover, if you use REST API, you can, if you have permissions to configure a job, you can upload a configuration XML file. And in such case, it will be also deserialized to Java objects. So it's also a thing which we filter in JEP-200.
So this means that it also protects you from, if someone has access to be able to create a configuration, they can't accidentally go and add classes that would violate this.
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it's a big change. Actually, we released it in January 2018 in Jenkins 2.102. So there was a blog post announcement with all the details, with guidelines, with troubleshooting, and we will be talking about it. And by now, so it's almost 2 months since this change has been related. We reached a 12% adoption in Jenkins installations. So what it means that weekly releases are being pretty widely used, but not everybody updates weeklies immediately. So by now we have only 12%. We've got lots of regressions. Some regressions have been identified even before the release, because we did a lot of testing. But then after the release, we also made many patches, and now the most of regressions are fixed and verified. And actually, we have a good community rating for the last 5 weekly releases. We still get some issues, but generally we are confident that the change is ready to go. And next week, we get a release of Jenkins 2.107.1. So it will be a first long-time support release, which includes this fix. And this is a point when the fix becomes available to the wider community.
And the question mark there is just assuming that there isn't some huge problem detected now, which would be very unlikely. But
yeah, it's highly unlikely because in order to properly verify the change, we started the release candidate testing earlier than we used to do. So it's in RC testing for 3 weeks by now. We identified some problems and fixed them. For example, on exotic configurations, it was due to some reasons, some configurations of Apache Tomcat were unable to pick whitelists, and effectively users were getting a super secure instance, but nothing was working there.
so secure that nothing happens.
Yeah. Yeah, so we applied some fixes, and now we are confident that it's ready to go.
Okay.
But yeah, since it's still in the release candidate, yeah, there is a slight possibility that something may change.
Okay.
And obviously, the date of the release may change as well. But yeah, March 15th is our target. So, is it time to upgrade? I mean, in 1 week we get LTS, and we need to understand as Jenkins admins whether we pick that or not, and what would be the process for that. I want to provide some heads up. So I said that community ratings are good. I said that we fixed many regressions. But yeah, there is a problem with that. Since we have a relatively low adoption, we still get new regressions. And the problem with that, it's, yeah, today we've got a new JEP-200 regression. Before that, there was no regressions reported for almost 5 days. It was a kind of achievement, I'd say. But yeah, today we've got the new one, and the counter goes back to 0. What does it mean? That we still have plugins in the wild which are probably affected. And before that, after the release of 2 months ago, we fixed more than 50 plugins since that. And there are major plugins affected, for example, pipeline, API declarative pipeline, job DSL, Maven plugin, Mesos, etc. And it means that almost every modern Jenkins instance would be actually affected if we just shipped it everywhere. By now, the regressions are fixed, so we get really good community ratings, and it should be fine.
So the ones you have listed here, are all of these fixed, or are there a few still left in this list that are still being worked on?
Yeah, there are a few left in the list. So if you go to the wiki page reference, then you may see actual statuses.
Okay.
For every plugin, we provide a current status, provide description of the issue, what's going on, and provide workarounds if possible. And we try to deliver fixes as quickly as we can, but obviously, in some cases, we cannot do that. As JEP-200 maintainers, we work only for plugins being hosted in Jenkins Update Center. And it also means that we don't fix the published plugin. So for example, there is a build flow plugin. It's a version of build definition which existed before pipeline. It has been depublished 1 year ago or so. So before that, it was deprecated for 2 years. And as JEP-200 maintainers, we decided not to fix this plugin. And it means that if you use this plugin on the modern versions of Jenkins, probably you will have to work around the issue. And I'll talk about workarounds later. So let me just show you an example of JEP-200. One of the affected plugins was build name setter plugin. It sounds pretty harmless. So it just allows to set a build name. On the screenshot, you see that you just define a value to set. But the problem is that this plugin was doing some bad serialization of types. Effectively, it was serializing print stream to the disk. So it's just a system class which defines IO stream. This class makes no sense in terms of configuration persistency or data persistency. It was just a design defect, and due to that, the plugin stopped working. And yeah, it has almost 30,000 installations.
Right. So, and in this case, like the built-in setter there, that's just the person that wrote the plugin used that particular way of serializing the stuff, but that they just didn't know better at that point, right?
It's not about better or not better. Java evolved significantly over years.
Oh, okay. So it's actually using earlier APIs. Okay.
Yeah, it's firstly about early APIs, then it's about the fact that Jenkins used to allow serializing everything. So, I mean, you were able to write something wrong, but it was working. And as long as it was working, you wouldn't care about that.
Right. Okay.
Let me show you what would happen if I launched this in a 1.6.7 version of the plugin. Actually, when you launch the job, you just get this Stacktrace. So actually, when you have a link like Jenkins.io to direct class filter, usually it means that you have a JEP-200 issue. And yeah, he is just a typical example of that, which happens during the build. So, I mean, when you launch your build, you see this Stacktrace. But actually, in JEP-200, it may happen during other conditions. For example, when you load configurations from the disk, when you save the configuration. And yeah, the scope of potential impact is pretty big. That's why it has been created as JEP, and that's why we invested so much time into testing and fixing the components.
Right. So it's not just the class loading itself; it's specific methods on the class as well, right?
No, it's not about methods. It's about fields.
Okay.
So, for example, if you have a static field, you are safe because static fields in Java are not being serialized. The same for transient fields. But for common types, yes, they're being serialized over the channel or over the over extreme to the disk. So yeah, it's something which may happen. It's not only about top class, but also about all data these classes bundle.
Got it.
Okay, so after this information, does it make sense to upgrade to Jenkins 107? Yes, it does make sense to do that. Firstly, we have fixed lots of real defects by updating the plugins. And yeah, generally Jenkins evolves, so we deliver more and more bug fixes and enhancements in the core as well. So of course, it makes sense to upgrade. And I recommend to do it at some point. But when to do that? So firstly, let's talk about common questions which we discuss about upgrades. Are there issues with JEP-200 real? Yes, they are. Mostly functional issues. Generally, you are safe. Yeah, we revealed many issues, but there was no security issues in the scope of deserialization. And we consider JEP-200 only as a security hardening.
So for instance, it isn't that JEP-200 addresses known security issues that we know are exposed and have to be, like, you have to upgrade because it fixes a specific security issue. It's more that it hardens the overall surface in general against future issues.
Exactly. It's investment into the future. So firstly, we prevent the class of defects. And secondly, we improve stability of plugins and we improve diagnostics of serialization mechanisms. So we can improve this side of Jenkins. Okay, regarding upgrade, actually we have a full upgrade cycle described in the blog post I've already referenced. But one of the steps I would like to highlight that I strongly recommend backing up your instance before you do the upgrade. Why? Because JEP-200 influences the serialization of configurations from the disk by extreme. So it means when your Jenkins starts up, it will be reading configurations, and in some cases, it may fail to read these configurations due to the class restrictions.
So it might actually fail on startup.
Yeah, It may fail on the startup. It may fail in different means. So, I mean, it may start up, but it will be executing jobs and they will be failing. Or Jenkins may refuse to start up at all. And the problem is that in Jenkins, all upgrades happen in one direction. So it means that during the upgrade to the new version, Jenkins may apply configuration changes. And in the case of the new LTS, we also migrate XML version to version 1.1. So it means that you won't be able to just replace Word file and get your instance running back. So here, as well as during any other upgrade, I really recommend to do a backup so that you can recover if something goes wrong. And then you go through the blog post, you open the wiki page I've previously referenced, and you get updates of the plugins which are affected. Hopefully, we will release all of the plugins by the next week. We are reaching out to maintainers to get their actions. But yeah, in the worst case, if you cannot update the plugin, there is still a possibility to apply workarounds. I'll talk about that on the next slide. And once you upgrade, we really recommend to monitor your instance. So, for example, when your instance starts up, check the startup log, ensure that there was no configuration loading issues, so that there is no missing configurations due to that. And then when builds execute, also take a look at them and make sure that there is no JEP-200 regressions.
So this is generally what we would expect administrators to do when they're upgrading their Jenkins anyways, or their plugins. Most Jenkins administrators will follow this process in general, being a little cautious, but it's doubly important in the case of this.
Exactly, because we know that this change may be a breaking one. Okay, so regarding workarounds, good news is that we have workarounds, and as Jenkins administrator, you can apply a class filter. So in addition to standard class filters and the whitelists in plugins, you can also pass system property as administrator and specify a list of classes to be whitelisted. And in our wiki page with the list of affected plugins, we try to provide patterns for this class filter. So even if the plugin fix is not released, you can use this information in order to apply a workaround. The problem is that it's not available for all plugins. So for example, if you use a blacklisted class like JSON object, then it's highly not recommended to add it to the class filter. Just to clarify, yes, you can do that, but in such case, you likely put your instance at risk. So all blacklisted classes, it's not recommended to whitelist them. And in such case, if you discover a plugin which uses this class for serialization, of course, you may need to roll back or to disable this plugin or to disable jobs using this plugin.
So the blacklisted classes like that, this will still work on those, but it's not recommended?
Yeah, it will work. It's not recommended. Yeah, and as we discussed with you, you have to blacklist, to whitelist not only classes, but their fields. So generally, it may require several iterations before you clean up all the things if you experience a new defect. Not a recorded one with known workarounds, but something new. So you can do these iterations, but yeah, obviously it's better to do it on the test server and not on the production. Okay, if you see a Stacktrace in the log, so I would just recommend a rule of thumb. If you see the link to this page in your log, then you are probably affected by JEP-200. And we kindly ask you to report this issue because there are JEP-200 maintainers which are able to fix them, to investigate them, and this information will help us to deliver fixes quickly. even if you are able to work around it by whitelisting. If you do not see such text in the log, even if you see new regression, probably it's not related to JEP-200. Of course, we still recommend to report this issue and to provide all information, but yeah, most likely it's not JEP-200.
And that redirect leads to that blog post that you talked about, right?
Yeah, it redirects to the same blog post. So we have a single point of entry. Okay, regarding reporting issues, as I said, we will be monitoring incoming issues at least for 2 months. And yeah, we really need your help, because if we don't see the issues, we won't be able to fix them. And Jenkins has more than 1,500 plugins by now. Obviously, it's not possible to test all these plugins and to verify them.
At least it's not possible for you to test them, right?
Exactly. We did our best. We tested almost 200 plugins. But yeah, please report whatever you see. Okay, so let's just summarize what we talked about. So first thing you need to do is to read the blog post before you upgrade. And when LTS is released, you will also see that LTS has upgrade guidelines. So please go through these update guidelines, because JEP-200 is not the only thing we are going to ship in this LTS. And then be prepared to this release. So once it's released, we recommend to do some testing. Release candidate for the incoming LTS is already available, so you can do testing even now. And yeah, even now we will process any kind of report related to JEP-200, even you run a release candidate or whatever. So we will process that. And if you're a plugin maintainer, we highly recommend to test your plugins. If you missed previous notifications, I have a slide deck below. I'm not going to show it today, but it will be published. And soon I will post a blog post with information how to test it and what to test. And if you have internal plugins in your companies, be also aware about that, because internal plugins may be affected as well.
Right. So I was just about to ask. That's the real sort of the unknowns that we have here, which is as an administrator, if you're using a plugin that you've developed in-house and have been updating, you might not be aware of whether or not it's using this, and we wouldn't be able to know that from the public side of things.
Exactly.
Right?
We still can help with triaging these issues. I mean that you can raise particular questions in the developer mailing lists if you need advice, or in RC. But yeah, obviously, since it's a private source plugin, we can only advise, and we cannot fix code. And yeah, in some cases, we already had cases, thanks a lot to Jenkins contributors. So some Jenkins admins have tested JEP-200 on their instances and discovered the issues for private source plugins, including issues related to standard libraries. So I mean that Java has a standard library of different classes, and some of these classes are also not whitelisted. So for such issue, even if it's an issue in a private source plugin, we can review the case and decide whether this is a valid case. And in such case, we can include it to the Jenkins main whitelist, so that other potential usages are not affected.
So even if it's my own in-house private source plugin, I should still report it and possibly at least get on the mailing list or onto IRC. Or file a Jira ticket on it to sort of start the discussion.
Yeah, it's something what we recommend. Obviously, if you have a private source plugin and you see that the plugin rejects to serialize your other private source library, so I mean a class for your own library, then we can't help much. But if you see that there is a standard Java class which has been rejected, then yes, please submit the issue because we can review them. Yeah, and hopefully we will fix the stuff. And another takeaway I would talk about is, of course, keep updating. Because, in Jenkins, we release many fixes, improvements, including security fixes on a regular basis. So we still have releases every week, and we have LTS releases every month. And I kindly recommend updating, or at least monitoring the updates and security advisories.
Keeping reasonably up to date with one of the recent LTS releases is a good way to go. Generally a best practice.
Yeah, obviously, if you have your own release cycle, for example, if you upgrade your infrastructure once every year, you may have a problem. But in such case, you likely don't expose this infrastructure to public. And in such case, of course, you are not affected by security issues.
Or less likely to be affected, right?
Yeah, there are still possibilities, but it's another story. Okay, if you have any questions about this presentation, about impact on the developers, etc., please don't hesitate to reach out to me and other contributors using our public channels. So we have IRC channel. You can find information about it on jenkins.io/chat. And we have developer and the user mailing lists. So if you have a question about testing your plugin, write in the developer mailing list. If you see an issue and want to just ask something, use user mailing list. But all these channels are alive and really active. So please don't hesitate to use them. That's why we have created them.
Yeah, so I see you on the IRC channel all the time. I see you responding to the dev list very regularly too. I'm on there pretty regularly as well. And not just us, but it's a very active community on those two channels, especially.
That's right.
Very knowledgeable people about Jenkins, and also and everyone on those channels is aware of this and can at least have some degree of ability to talk to it.
Yeah, that's right. So even if I'm offline, I sleep sometimes. There are other people who are happy to help.
Excellent. Oleg, thank you very much for going over this with us. And I will see you on IRC and on mailing list.
Yeah, thank you very much, Liam. And as I'll make sure that all blog posts and other materials are posted.
Great, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.